What's an adaptation? Taking a thing from one medium and moving it to another. Pokemon, it was a game, then went to an anime, and then in 2019 it went to that. I'll come to you. I hate how the conversation around video game adaptations hasn't changed that much over the past 30 years. With our new project, we're going to break the video game curse. Shut up, you're annoying, stop. There are a blend of good adaptations and bad adaptations, but what makes for a good one? It's really hard to narrow down. If a movie or TV show is a one-to-one recreation of the game, is that a good adaptation? Do we want to adapt the source material almost one-to-one? In my opinion, no. Games are a different medium. With my favorite adaptations, I prefer a show or movie to take place in a different continuity, or do something different. Like, for example, Detective Pikachu doesn't try to adapt Ash to live action. It's different. Is it good? I'll come to you. I'm going to talk about different game franchises and analyze how they translate the movies and TV shows in a best to worst format. What makes for a bad adaptation? If I need to consume the source material to enjoy it, I don't think it should be called a good adaptation. It should be able to stand alone. If it's a bad movie, then by proxy, it's not a good adaptation. Yeah, that's it. There is a franchise here that doesn't have a movie. I'll cover that one first. The Last of Us. What did I talk about here? It was a game that came out in 2013. It got a sequel in 2020, and do you all want me to be a hater this early in? Nah, I love this show. Artists don't usually get a chance to look back over their past work and get a redo. It applies to YouTube videos. When you drop it, there's no going back. I look at my videos from a year ago and think about what I could have done better. Can you only imagine the amount of tuning you could do to your art that's 10 years old? Taking a great bit of art and getting the opportunity to put it into another medium? It's a recipe for something amazing. Neil Druckmann, the creative director and writer for The Last of Us, and the creator of the HBO series Chernobyl, Craig Mazin, came together and created this show. First off, I'm going to point it out again in the future, but having figures of authority from both industries is important when it comes to adapting video game properties from one medium to another. Because as a screenwriter and someone from traditional TV, you need to do your job and pick the brain of the game developer. And you gotta start from scratch and rebuild, in my opinion. Now, I don't mean rebuild in terms of plot, but every shot in The Last of Us game should not and does not translate to the TV show. The TV show does some things straight up better than the game. Take, for example, the introduction. In the game, it starts straight off with Joel and Sarah. The show, it starts off with this period-accurate talk show of doctors talking to the host about how cordyceps could possibly mutate and take over the world. And it's a scene that I find morbidly funny, because the control of the talk show gradually shifts from the host to Dr. Newman. The use of close-ups just work incredibly as well. It shows where these two mediums meet. The show likes to show, the emotion of people. Typically in editing, if words aren't being said, there is a real fear that people will stop watching. Heck, I have to have Subway Surfers beside me while I'm editing this video, or else I'll get bored. But The Last of Us likes to hold on to faces for a longer amount of time. This really allows the cast to shine, as they can convey a lot of emotion, and they have the time to do so. Spoiler alert if you haven't watched the show. Whenever Henry dies, instead of the shot having Joel in, Joel being pretty much unfazed, you see Ellie react to Henry, this shot holding for 10 seconds. Compare that to the game, which is really quick in comparison to that scene, which makes for a less emotional, worse pace in my opinion, but you have to take into consideration that this is a cutscene from a game. The people who bought The Last of Us want to play a game. Yeah, there's an entire game here. No freaking way. Interestingly, the shot of Ellie for 10 seconds is telling to the medium. TV shows don't have to stay to one perspective. It's malleable, and not having the narrative tethered to Joe at all times makes it undoubtedly better. Take, for example, in episode 3, which is one of the best episodes of TV ever in my opinion. I had a debate with my friend about that take, but I have rewatched it, and I've kind of changed my mind. It's one of the best for sure. This episode alone is an example of why this show is a good adaptation. It not only stays very faithful to the original material, using a lot of the same dialogue, and some of the shots being references to the gameplay, but it also doesn't fear changing things if they should be, for the sake of making a better story. Episode 3. There has been critique for the show in terms of Joel's character, Joel not being the same guy he was in the game. In the game he played as him, and in an action-adventure zombie apocalypse, do you not think players would like to shoot stuff? The fact that you spend a significant portion of the game attacking the infected, and the fact that it's a conscious gameplay decision, do you not think that would have affected his characterization in the game? In the show, Joel's just more human, which is what audiences kind of want from a TV show. They don't want a guy who's killing everything in sight, although they can't even avoid that here. Narratively, Joel wanting to see Tommy as a more authentic goal, and it makes more sense why he would take Ellie with him, because there's no reason why he wouldn't at that point. Other people have complained about Ellie the character being annoying. like really annoying. First off, people forget that she's 14. She's also been through a lot, so it makes sense that she's had stunted growth. And lastly, she becomes more likable as the show goes on. That's kind of the entire point of her and Joel's character arc. They both make up for what each other lack. There's been a lot of confusion about season 2. Will they rewrite the entire thing? Will they stay faithful? There was an entire interview with GQ, and I think they're going to change things up a bit. And I do know that part 2 is controversial, so I'm not going to spread misinformation, even though that would be pretty fun. Its position on this list is at the top at the moment. Depending on the future of the show, it could go down, but I'm hopeful. I give it a amazing. Oh my gosh, Arcane! First hot take incoming? This show is a weird adaptation. Whoa, let me talk. I do respect it, but calling it an adaptation is kind of disingenuous. I think it's important to note that I have never played League, nor do I really want to. My brain's too tiny for that. But from what I understand, and feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, League of Legends, the game, is different from League of Legends, the lore. Arcane is an adaptation in that it takes the lore and spins it into what it can be described as media excellence. It doesn't adapt the game. Heck, the game is arguably non-canon, meaning it's not official in the main storyline. The animation is beautiful, the lighting is impressive, the characters are incredibly expressive, and it's fluid and stunning, and what's even more fun is that it came out before the 3D animation renaissance of DreamWorks in 2022. It's also exemplary in how to do representation right, and it does have an advantage to other adaptations in that anyone can watch it. The League of Legends connection is in name and lore alone, and while it isn't really applicable to this video in terms of what I'm grading, I do respect the show, and it is worth talking about, and I will, just not here. Ratchet and Clank is really bad. Now don't get me wrong, I love being a hater, but mentioning the commercial success of a movie is a pretty low blow, as quality and success are not synonymous. It had a $20 million budget and it made $14.4 million back. The animation? Awful. There are parts that look okay, but the textures oftentimes look incredibly lackluster, and for lack of a better description, bad. There's something about the lighting that just makes everything look kind of orange. The particle effects are mid too. To be fair, it does look better than some of the movies that came out that year, like Sausage Party, but that's not really a fair comparison. Sausage Party had a slightly smaller budget. It was an R-rated movie, instantly making out of a smaller audience from rating alone. It wasn't based off an already existent and wildly successful franchise, and it's just kind of embarrassing. The entire movie comes off lazy. Lazy in that it was a game tie-in. They dropped the movie alongside the game to drive sales, and you can kind of tell. They do Easter eggs that only PlayStation fans would get, and it's funny because that didn't even sway the audience to liking it. It's a cliche movie, which is fine, and as an adaptation, it works, I guess. The plot is comically generic, it's not hurting anyone. Captain Quark is not a likable character. He's the jock archetype. Most characters in this movie are one-dimensional, and I don't care for anyone. However, my favorite character is Clank, because he's the straight man, and the trope of having a character who misunderstands things is funny. The character designs are generic too. Everyone that isn't a part of the main cast look like stock background characters for a sci-fi animated movie. What are you? To be fair, I do think that me not playing the games is a factor in terms of me not liking this as an adaptation, but you're going to find that out, that just because I played the game doesn't mean I automatically like it as a movie. Even then, the target audience for the movie throws me off. It's obvious by the lack of visuals and the lack of nuance towards anything that this is a kids movie. As let's face it, kids don't really care for emotionally gripping narratives. However, that's not to say they can't, it's just not here. Yet the IP of Ratchet and Clank is old, and it never had the same brand recognition that Sonic or Mario had. So the people watching it for the Ratchet and Clank IP would be fans of PlayStation. But even then, the target audience is small and older. The older audience would likely appreciate something with more nuance in the characters, and a plot that isn't as generic as they come. Okay, looking at the qualities that this movie has, I imagine it being background noise for a kid watching Netflix, not something that I'd pay to go out and watch in theaters. If there's one positive I can mention, it's the infrequent dry humor that PlayStation IPs have got. Like, one of the Ratchet and Clank games is called Size Matters, which you gotta admit, that's funny. And in the movie, there are the occasional jokes that would lead you to believe that, yeah, only adults would find that funny. Like, there's a joke about the Wilhelm scream. The timing on some jokes are funnier, and the stupid dialogue is sometimes pointed out by the characters. Honestly, hand on heart, the ending is kind of cute, and it comes full circle, which I like. And they set up for a sequel. Who would have thought? But I don't think we're getting that sequel. Ever. I fell under the spell of the hype, and I did watch it when it came out, because how could you not? What was it competing against? Anyway, this movie felt like a blur, and I rewatched it for the video, and I feel like my closing sentiment is that Ratchet and Clank could work in a movie, and they could work really well, but here they didn't put in the effort to make it work. This gets a bad grade. On the worst to best scale, it's one of the worst ones in my opinion. Next up, Detective Pikachu is a spin-off of Pokemon that was in development for years. I remember being a kid and seeing those weird renders of Pikachu online, and who would have thought that come 2019, we'd get a Pokemon movie in theaters. It's not the typical Pokemon trainer experience, but it shouldn't be. You don't have enough runtime to encapsulate the entire story of a region. That being said, Detective Pikachu the game and Detective Pikachu the movie are pretty different. The endings are different, the characters are different, kinda, but there are other Pokemon adaptations that I'll cover before this honk. Being honest with you, the Pokemon anime is pretty bad. Ash vs Leon was a great fight, but it could have been better. Although I'm happy that Ash left the anime, because the premise of a Pokemon anime without Ash could be very cool. The Pokemon anime movies are pretty bad too. There are a few gems, but they gradually get worse over time. I think that a really cool adaptation of the games are Pokemon Origins. It's a 4-episode long show that covers Red and Blue. It's got beautiful animation, and I highly suggest watching it because the main anime leaves a bad taste in everyone's mouths. Pokemon Generations is a fun watch, but they could have done way more with it. The upcoming series could be good, but time will tell. Also, it's not even adapting the games anymore. Pokemon as a collective franchise is bang in the middle when it comes to translating the games to TV shows and movies, but if you individually analysed every pillar, there are some gems, but I feel like it's all missed potential, which is kind of indicative of the entire franchise. Detective Pikachu is interesting. I have mixed feelings on it, like really mixed. On the one hand, I appreciate it because there are a lot of elements in this movie that work, and work well, but on the other hand, I think that it could have been a lot better. I think the first problem is that the Pokemon are kind of weird. Who would have thought? Yeah, I'm not sure if live action was the correct move for this movie. A lot of the Pokemon designs feel more like the Bearded Sonic movie design than the Tyson Hesse version. They tried to make realistic Pokemon, which works for Pikachu and a few others, but generally I don't like them. Gengar doesn't work in live action looking like that. Apom in live action doesn't work. Ken Sugimori didn't design Pokemon with the idea in mind that one day they'd be converted into real creatures, and the Pokemon in this movie aren't even designed consistently. Why does Psyduck get to look like that, yet Charizard looks like a generic dragon? They could have given Charizard accurate proportions, but they were more concerned with making an intimidating creature than one that accurately depicted the in-game design. Some of the best designs are the ones that accurately depict the in-game design. Controversial, but whenever you design Growlithe as looking like an actual dog with extra hair, it looks generic. When you have Snubbull and convert him into a real breathing creature that looks like that, it looks better, in my opinion. Ludicolo is another good depiction, I guess, but I wish they toned it down with the eyes. I feel like the eyes don't need to be realistic like a human. I would have liked the movie a lot more if they didn't try to make Pokemon uncannily realistic. I wish they approached every Pokemon like how they did Psyduck. Keep them accurate to the in-game art, you know? And I do get that some Pokemon are meant to be weird looking, but I think the movie picks and chooses what designs they want to be gross. Mewtwo and Greninja look uncannily wet. To top it all off, the most blatant example of how they didn't know what direction to go in is the fact that some Pokemon say their names and others make animal sounds. Like, why does Psyduck say its name, yet Snubbull doesn't? Most of the appeal from this movie is the fact that it's a Pokemon movie. You know, the highest grossing franchise ever? Little bit of insider knowledge. I had a girlfriend, and part of the reason why we broke up was because of this movie, which is pretty funny. Visually, removing the uncanny aspect, the movie is charming because of the Pokemon. I loved seeing the world splattered with Pokemon everywhere. The team behind the movie knew what they were doing in regards to the inclusion of Pokemon, even if they don't always stick the landing. Such a minor point, but I love how natural everything is. In the introduction to Tim's character, the way Tim and Jack talk about Pokemon is incredibly natural, and you could believe that hypothetically, in a world with Pokemon, people would walk and talk like them. Heck, even the way they say Pokemon is normal.
That is the perfect Pokemon for you.
As opposed to the anime where they say Pokemon, which I know is how you're meant to say it, but Detective Pikachu feels more natural. Furthermore, the fact that Tim wanted to be a Pokemon trainer when he was younger shows a more realistic approach to the world. A Pokemon trainer is a difficult career. Not everyone can be Ash Ketchum. The movie covers main characters Tim Goodman and Detective Pikachu. He is Tim's dad, but that's the big plot twist. The tone in this movie changes frequently, so it's hard to be emotional when they want you to be emotional. Because true to after there would be.
Oh, you feel it in your jellies, don't you?
Yeah, I don't like him either. Pikachu in this movie, played by Ryan Reynolds, is a great addition. It's cute seeing the rapport between Pikachu and Tim build throughout the movie. Before it was revealed that Ryan Reynolds was Pikachu, there was a campaign online championing for Danny DeVito to be Pikachu, and maybe it's just the feeling that the grass is greener on the other side, but if Danny DeVito was Pikachu, the movie would have had a way different tone, and I think it would be more fitting. Danny DeVito being a goofy little guy matches better with Pikachu than Ryan Reynolds, in my opinion. But with the product we got, I've got to admit, I do like the rapport we got with Justice Smith and Ryan Reynolds. Long story short, Pikachu ends up being Tim's dad, and while it's a cute twist, it confused me because throughout the movie, Pikachu just acts stupid at times, and when you view his actions through the lens of a middle-aged dad, instead of a Pokemon, it's a lot less excusable. On a more positive note, the lighting in this movie is gorgeous. Rhyme City is so colourful, and it succeeds in making you want to live there. The way the light interacts with the Pokemon too is incredible, as seen by Pikachu's eyes when light gets shined into them. There is one attribute of Detective Pikachu that you can't fault. It's not lazy, like, at all. There are Easter eggs scattered throughout which goes to show the amount of care and detail. There was even a reference to the first Pokemon opening at one point. For every argument you can make towards it being bad, there's a point going against it that makes it good. The plot does have a few twists in it. While it does instantly show you who the bad guy is, it makes it pretty obvious. They do throw you off the trail a bit by showing how Howard's son, Roger, is a cruel guy. Yet at the third act, they throw you through a loop again by making him a good guy. It's undeniable that the movie is corny. Comically corny. Like, there's a point in the story where Pikachu is out of commission, and you'd expect it to be because of something serious, right? But no, Pikachu gets hit by a rock, and then is close to dying. Like, okay, that's interesting. It's not like he was hit by a Charizard half an hour ago. How does a rock take him out? The climax is contrived too. Why is the stipulation for Mewtwo transferring the minds of people in Pokemon? Not the Pokemon have to be in a crazed state. To my knowledge, Mewtwo in every canon except for Detective Pikachu has never been able to do that. Only control others. I think if you look at this movie objectively, as someone who knows nothing about Pokemon, it's average at best. If you're a fan of Pokemon, you're obviously gonna enjoy it due to its fan service. The movie is really pretty at parts, but the narrative is confusing. Like, why does Roger go from being this unlikable prick to saving Tim and telling Lisa to report it on primetime TV? Howard also just sucks. We barely knew him, so why would we care about him being the antagonist? I suppose my biggest problem with Detective Pikachu is that it's overly indulgent on the idea of Pokemon, prioritizing that over telling a compelling story. They have this hologram technology which has got very little narrative significance, yet they make a big deal out of it. I feel like you could have trimmed off the fat and it would have made for a much more compelling and better movie overall. It would have helped a lot with the pacing, as the pacing in this movie is not very good, like at all. We barely spend time in Tim's hometown. The entire sequence with Pikachu being damaged feels rushed, and it felt like they were trying to get us from Act 2 to Act 3 ASAP. One thing that I think would have helped the movie out a bit would be the use of more Pokemon music. There were references in the soundtrack, but it was still really bland in my opinion. On the scale, I think it's closer to best, but that's not really a compliment. The Pokemon carry this movie, and if it didn't have Pokemon, it would have been easily forgotten about in a matter of months. In fact, I don't even think Pokemon saved it from being forgotten about. I think a sequel is getting made, and come to think of it, where would they even go in terms of narrative? But we've gotta be patient and bear in mind that before Detective Pikachu, there were no good movies in this category. Detective Pikachu, in relation to every other movie, was the gold standard. Until Uncharted. This movie is one of the most movies ever. Where do we begin? Mark Wahlberg is Sully. For the record, I don't like Mark Wahlberg at all. It's a 5-second Google search to find every atrocity he's committed, and I used to beat myself up for having a questionable history in Discord, but what I said and done is a drop in the bucket compared to the megapint of Mark Wahlberg crimes. Then Tom Holland. Tom Holland. He's been showing up more and more over the past few years. I don't mind him as an actor, but he doesn't fit here, like, at all. And it came out that Tom Holland didn't like playing the character of Nathan Drake. And you can tell. I don't know why they went with Tom here. He doesn't look old enough to play Nathan Drake, even if he's like 25. He also doesn't look big enough, because he isn't. Short King. So far, based on how I've talked about the movie, you'd think that I think it's bad. And you're correct, I did not like it. I watched the movie when it came out in theaters in 2022, I finished it and I really just didn't enjoy my time. It doesn't warrant the 2-hour runtime at all. The movie is just splicing together parts of the games to try and make a cohesive story that is really just apps. None of the characters are remotely likable or resemble their in-game counterparts. Mark Wahlberg is there. Did you know that? He doesn't feel like Sully from the game. He doesn't feel like that dodgy uncle who you still love. He feels like a creepy racist. If Detective Pikachu was corny in a good good way. This movie is corny in a bad way. Yes, the movie is called Uncharted, but the movie takes the plot from every Uncharted game and shuffles it around to where it just doesn't fit the original games anymore. I don't recognize Tom Holland as Nathan Drake because of poor casting. I don't recognize Mark Wahlberg as Sully because of bad casting. On screen, they have such little synergy. They don't work very well at all as a duo. They have locations from the games and put them into the movie as a way to get the audience to be like, wow, I remember that part of the game. And the movie is just boring until the climactic fight. Like, we get this chase scene between this character Chloe, Nathan, and Mark Wahlberg, and it's a 3-minute long, incredibly drawn out joke of a sequence. It also made me realize how stupid the dialogue in this movie is. I watched Jacksepticeye play through Uncharted. I'm pretty much a super fan. But the dialogue in the games is just much more witty and charismatic than the dialogue in the movie. I'm just watching it and laughing.
You gotta be kidding me, what a rookie mistake!
Stop talking like that. I need to recompose, be fair, and approach this movie logically and with good faith. This movie was not off to a good start. It was in the works for over 10 years, and at the point it came out, they had 4 games of lore to work from. Jokes aside, the casting ruined any hope this movie had of being good. Fundamentally, the cast playing these characters either made it or broke it, as the characters of Nathan and Sully were a large factor of the game's success, and they fumbled it completely. The budget was $120 million, and you think with that amount of ammunition, they could have done a lot more. The cinematography was incredibly boring. The most exciting thing it did was use a drone, but contrary to what everyone else thought, I kind of liked the intro. The transition of the intro into Sam helping Nathan back in was well done. You know me, I just love a good match cut. Not to be a Debbie Downer, like, let's face it, when have I not been in this video, but they use the exact same cut twice within 2 minutes. It's really embarrassing for them, because it just proves my point that they do nothing unique with the cinematography. Although I felt that the frequent 3D text that they use throughout the movie just doesn't look professional, nor does it really fit the aesthetic of the game. Side point, the music is abysmal. None of the music they have in the movie is memorable, and every track they have with lyrics is abhorrent. I mean abhorrent in that it doesn't match the tone of the movie. Speaking of which, I don't even know what tone the movie's going for. Because of the music, every track they have is either forgettable or so generically hip-hop inspired that it leaves nothing memorable about the movie itself. This adaptation sucks. They got a lot wrong. It takes one Google search to find Sam on YouTube, and every clip you watch, you can hear a Brooklyn accent.
Does the name Hector Alcazar ring a bell with you?
He doesn't have that in the movie.
We're looking for the Age of Explorers exhibit.
Every time you look into an aspect of this movie, it just makes it more and more evident that this movie is Uncharted in name alone. The plot is Nate and Sam get separated, and the movie is about Nate trying to find Sam again. Mark Wahlberg, I'm not gonna call him Sully, magically just knowing Sam. Even though in the game Sully knows Sam through Nate. Anyway, it's a MacGuffin plot, and not a good one. We travel to these areas in these annoying and corny transition scenes. Get these action sequences that are really okay. Apart from you.
What a rookie mistake!
If anything, it's impressive watching Tom Holland, but wow, you could watch the cutscenes from the games and get more enjoyment than the movie. The climax takes place in 2 ships as Sully and Nathan are fighting for the loot that they spent the entire movie trying to get. This ship fight is 15 minutes long and probably the most boring climax of a movie that I've ever seen aside from Ratchet and Clank. There's this part where Mark Wahlberg has to choose between the loot or Nathan, and it would have been somewhat powerful if 1, these characters weren't wet wipes, and
I got a job coming up. A big one.
2, we hadn't seen this trope played over and over again. There is no reason why you should watch this movie. There are thousands of more competently produced action-adventure movies that encapsulate every emotion this movie is trying to make you feel, and then some. And I've wasted several hours of my life trying to find positive points to talk about. Uncharted the movie is one of the most egregious cases of the video game movie curse, and it's embarrassing because it succeeded. It's not even worth the watch. Even if you want to watch it for being bad, you go down here, bud. I like Sonic, and like Pokemon. There are many pillars to the Sonic franchise, many shows, and OVA even. First off, the Sonic cartoons are harmless. Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog is a fine kids cartoon that takes inspiration from the original game and adds its own flair. Same thing for like every other Sonic cartoon, but I like Sonic Boom a lot. This show deserves more credit for its comedy. It's still being posted to this day. There are points of the show where it falls flat, like some episodes look really rough, but overall, it's the most popular Sonic show. Sonic Prime is Canadian, that's enough. I don't really like how the Canadian government has got protectionism when it comes to media. here. It makes Canadian media way too cut off, and on top of that, it's kind of hard to be a Canadian talent and get out of your own country. I don't really have any points of contention for the other adaptations. I think they're all fine. They all take the Sonic IP and do their own thing with it, which I respect. And not to mention every promotional cartoon they've made for the games. Sonic Mania Adventures is so fun, and I wish it was longer. Okay, now what we've all been waiting for. The Sonic movies, all 2 of them! Sonic the Hedgehog 1 is a very restrained movie when it comes to showing Sonic iconography. There would be references to the franchise occasionally, but the plot of the movie is incredibly held back, and understandably so. It was venturing into uncharted territory as arguably the first mainstream mascot to get adapted into live action. I know about Detective Pikachu, but Sonic was an actual character. There is a lot more to get wrong with Sonic than there was Pikachu. In fact, they did get things wrong. They completely fumbled their design first time around and became a laughingstock to everyone. The Sonic movie had a funny development. I don't know if it's real, but there was a casting sheet quote-unquote leaked that had the actors that they'd like to play the role of Tom and Sonic respectively. And the list is really funny. Chris Pratt, Chris Evans, Paul Rudd, Michael B. Jordan, Jason Segel, Ansel Elgort could have been Tom, and for Sonic, Tom Holland, and that entire list is funny. I also love equally as much that Chris Pratt could have been for either, and that makes it funnier. Too many people give this movie credit for being great in my opinion. I feel that the sentiment that the Sonic movie is great is purely down to the fact that Sonic is there, and don't get me wrong, I like James Marsden as much as the next guy, but don't act like the adventure movie with the white guy and CGI protagonist hasn't been done to death. It's a trope at this point and a boring one at that. Like, look at this image of car shots with wacky CGI character and straight man white guy. James Marsden is in too. That alone doesn't make it bad, but stop looking at this movie through a rose-tinted lens. It's not great. I do, however, admit that the movie has got plenty of charm. A common complaint is the lackluster soundtrack, which is upsetting because the source material has so many bangers to choose from. That being said, the casting for Sonic is pretty much perfect. I love Ben Schwartz playing Sonic. He matches the design perfectly and his tone is a perfect blend of every modern Sonic incarnation too. Jim Carrey plays Robotnik in this movie, a really imposing and intelligent antagonist. Every time Robotnik is in a scene, he almost always steals the show. I love the government angle from it too. They know that Sonic is a wildly powerful alien, and it's the most reasonable reaction to want to get rid of him. James Marsden plays Sonic's buddy in this movie, Tom. He's a typical human that just tags along, and unfortunately, the humans are the worst and the least interesting part of Sonic 1. But you'd expect that though, because of Sonic. Sonic is just a really fun character to watch. He's a stupid little kid, even if he's played by a 40-year-old. The introduction to the movie is this non-linear, self-aware voiceover that Sonic does, and it's perfectly in character. This movie doesn't take itself seriously, and it shouldn't. I think that's a problem it easily could have had. Hard take incoming, but the Sonic games are at their best when Sonic isn't trying to be serious. Nothing embodies the ethos of this movie better than Robotnik. When all is said and done, Robotnik in this movie will be a metaphor for the movie franchise, as we know that there's going to be 3 Sonic movies. Sonic 1 is a really safe movie in terms of introducing the IP, and it gradually gets more and more unhinged. Robotnik has got my favorite character arc in the movie. Just gradually watching Jim Carrey become Eggman, it's surreal. Not to mention, they introduce an original character called Dr. Stone, who is also really fun to watch. Dr. Stone may as well be a part of the Sonic continuity at this point, because he's a fan favorite and an actual human being that Robotnik can bounce off of. Which it's weird to think about, but what an ingenious idea, as Robotnik has never had that until now. It made me view his character in a different light. Like his in-game counterpart, his drones are reminiscent of the bandits in Sonic Forces. I interpreted them all being white to symbolize how he's held together, and as he gradually gets more and more deranged, that's when you begin to see the Eggman traits come into effect. The climax was a cool chase scene, and I liked the speech that Sonic gave.
This is my power, and I'm not using it to run away anymore. I'm using it to protect my friends.
And I forgot to mention it, but using the rings as teleporters is a really unique way to tie it back to long forgotten lore, and it's a brilliant touch. I think that's where the positives end for me. This movie is held together by very little. Tom sabotaged Sonic and is now in debt to him, so to repay him, Tom's going to help Sonic find his rings again. The way Tom acts before the bar and the way Tom acts after the bar are 2 completely different characters. He inadvertently encourages Sonic to start a bucket list and then helps him out with it, despite Sonic being branded as a domestic threat. If there's one thing that the bar scene did, it will cement that this is in fact a kids movie. Who would have thought that the Sonic movie would be a movie made for kids? It's the type of thing that I would have found really fun when I was younger, and I guess that it had to happen for Tom and Sonic to grow closer as friends. I find it really funny that the bar fight is so contrived. These 3 guys rock up and tell Sonic and Tom that they don't like hipsters, which is ironic because look at Tom. What about his character indicates that he's a hipster? Nothing! I'd be the first to admit that there are a handful of things in this movie movie that I like, ranging from Sonic to Robotnik to the climax. I think that the movie is pretty enjoyable if you're a Sonic fan. If you're not a Sonic fan, like you're an average human being, oof, this movie is undoubtedly forgettable. The trope of the bar fight has been done to death, and a lot of the scenes in this movie are cliche. If it weren't for Sonic, this movie would have been reviewed much worse. On the scale, I put it right in the middle. I think it would be idiotic to put this movie on either end of the spectrum. Next up, number 2. The Sonic movie crawled so Sonic 2 could crawl faster. What you could infer from that statement is that Sonic 2 is better than Sonic 1. Yes and no. Whereas Sonic 1 suffers from being a generic film, it works because of the dichotomy between Robotnik and Sonic, and wherever James Marsden fits in. It was self-contained, straightforward in premise, and didn't bite off more than it could chew. Setting up a sequel wasn't really a priority, and it only came into the picture after everything else was concluded. Sonic 2 is less generic, opens Pandora's box in terms of Sonic iconography, which is not only great, but it kind of turned out to be to the movie's detriment. At least it did for me. The best attribute of Sonic 2 is it's extremely varied in locations in comparison to the first. It also introduces Knuckles and Tails, and who could forget my favourite character, Randall. Adding more Sonic characters to the plot really improved the entertainment factor of the movie, although I've got a feeling that it strained the budget a bit. I'll come to that. I didn't expect this movie to blow my mind in terms of cinematography, nor did I expect Martin Scorsese to come out and comment on its excellence. However, being your average local white man with a minor interest in film, such a unique subset of human, this movie, as a movie, is objectively not good. Objectively obviously being a joke. Firstly, the pacing is incredibly poor. The plot about Hawaii wasn't enjoyable, and if the story was self-contained, it would have worked way better. Except the story wasn't self-contained, and the entire Hawaii plot was to set up Sonic 3. No, think about it. They had this plot element from Sonic 1 of the government trying to catch Sonic, and while it was the catalyst to everything in that movie, you forgot it was ever a factor when Jim went crazy. And it vanishes in Sonic 2 for half of the duration, before haphazardly returning and messing up this B-plot I otherwise wouldn't have had a problem with. The reason why I wouldn't have had a problem with the Hawaii B-plot being there is because it gives a reason for James Marsden to not be in the A-plot, meaning we get more Sonic and Tails. And we did get that, but it's a bit annoying because even despite Sonic and Tom being separate, Sonic is still living in Tom's head rent-free. Like, bro, you're on holiday for your sister-in-law's marriage and you're still thinking of Sonic?
I wish Sonic had that. Buddies, wingmen, a squad. Well, Sonic doesn't have anything like that. He's flying solo.
Bro, shut up. Your entire life doesn't revolve around Sonic. The entire Hawaii bit is to embarrass Tom, because there is a running gag that him and his sister-in-law aren't on good terms. So Tom's gotta be on best behavior. But he continually commits self-sabotage for Sonic. We're meant to believe that this guy is a grown adult. Then randomly, it results in it all turning out to be a sting operation, which goes to exploit Tom's sheer stupidity. They have also got a large section of the movie dedicated to showing the women characters thriving, and it's like, yeah, that's cool. I understand and encourage empowerment of women in media, but here I don't like it. Number 1. If it has a negative impact in that more important plot beats of the film are sacrificed for it, it kind of just leaves me miffed, and I'm sure that the general audience picked up on it too. It could be patronizing to the women in the audience. Number 2. Boys have a lot of representation in media. In general, Sonic not being an exception. If you want the girls in the audience to have a character to point at and gawk at for being a girl boss, you've got Amy, and she's got the positive trait of being an anthropomorphic animal, just like Sonic. Now granted, having 4 animals in the movie would have been way too many. Hypothetically, if there is a plot for a movie made featuring Amy, you know, imagine like a Sonic CD inspired movie, and we got to choose between that or the Sonic 2 we got, featuring Rachel. If I was a woman, I'd feel much more empowered if the character representing me was Amy, and she was the geologist, rather than have my representation restricted to a bride who is 90% comic relief. Who am I to talk about representation though? That wasn't the only aspect of the movie I didn't like. I found it ironic that despite having a drastically different post-production than the first movie, a lot of the effects look really cheap. I noticed this issue whenever Eggman was in the Eggmobile. Gross. And then there's the odd issue with the models interacting with humans. What made it ironic was that there was way less of a turnaround for Sonic 1, as they had to change the model in a few months, whereas here, they had 2 years to sort out everything this time. And you already had the R&D of making the animal characters. It doesn't end there. You know the bar scene from movie 1 that is used to build Sonic and Tom's relationship? And it's a real moment of bonding because these two characters are lone wolves and they have to stick together and work past past their differences. Enter Sonic 2, where bam, we've got Tails. And by the end of the movie, you need to have Tails and Sonic be besties. So how do you develop them? They really just did Control-C, Control-V. The writers just went to the last movie, grabbed that bar scene, and dropped it here. And then we're like, we don't have as much time to build Tails and Sonic's relationship, so we're going to use Uptown Funk to turn them into besties. Like, bro, you could have had the exact same scene, but change the location. It also doesn't help that they reuse a dodgy translator trope that I've seen so many times. I've seen this take many times, but if you removed the Sonic Brandon from the first movie, you'd just be left with a generic and forgettable movie. And while the exact same thing reigns true here, the Sonic jargon and iconography makes it a lot more interesting for Sonic fans. And it's the only reason why I could say I like this movie. I like how it does unique ideas with the Sonic IP. Seeing Robotnik use the Master Emerald was really cool. I really loved how they used the power of the Chaos Emeralds and combined it with Jim Carrey's zany embodiment of the character to create a creepier, albeit still goofy rendition of the Super Eggman fanning character. It was really cool seeing Sonic become Super, even though Robotnik was already defeated. The film critic in me thinks that having Super Sonic in the movie does nothing but allude to the fact that it'll come up again in a third or fourth movie. Then alternatively, the Sonic fan in me just liked seeing Super Sonic. There's some weird stuff that goes on with the power of the characters though, and I noticed it whenever Robotnik was defeated. Like, it doesn't make sense for an omnipotent character to be defeated in that way. Giving another example, Knuckles was so easily hit by Tails in a car, despite previously being this powerful warrior, which is stupid, but I guess that was Knuckles' entire character. But it doesn't mean it's good. And then by the end of the movie, he just turns into a male version of Starfire from Teen Titans. Haha, Alien Warrior doesn't understand English completely. Isn't that so funny?
I am having the fun.
That intones the evil.
Speaking of funny, or not funny, weird. Sonic and Tom in the last movie were equals in my opinion, and that's what made me like their dynamic a lot. And I was open to the humans taking a backseat in the movie, as it gave more time for Sonic to do his thing. But I couldn't help but point out this shift in dynamic, and I've gotta point it out. Tom and Maddie have seemingly adopted Sonic and call him son, and there's a scene on this boat where Tom is like, oh, Sonic, responsibility is important, you know? Sonic mentions about them being on a boat, and Tom replies, oh, my dad had that exact same conversation with me right here. Isn't that crazy? And I genuinely don't know if it was my brain being altered by They're out of jail too, by the way. But I find it incredibly weird how Sonic and Tom have this father-son dynamic. Despite that, Sonic 2 is a better adaptation of the Sonic franchise than Sonic 1, and it isn't afraid to pull from the source material. In everything bar music, come on, you could have done more. Despite my gripes, it's still a fun watch. I don't think it stands on its own though. The way they stuck GUN into the plot was poorly done for the sake of making a cinematic universe. It actively dampened my experience of the movie. While I said it's better than Sonic 1, it is and it isn't. Sonic 1 is a better movie for the general audience. Sonic 2 was for the gamers. If you were out of the loop in the first one because you don't know Sonic, I can only imagine the amount of confusion in the second one. You get to go here.
It's a me, a Mario.
The Mario franchise, what a fun and lighthearted time to be alive. We've got a few shows and movies to look at here, and they gradually get more and more interesting. Number 1, the Super Mario Bros. Super Show. I watched this show growing up. I don't even remember what I watched it on, but it's a show from my childhood, and it deserves more credit because it was a pioneer for YouTube poops. As an adaptation, a few years after the franchise began, I think that it does a pretty okay job, even if it is corny. Of course, it looks a bit weird in the modern day, because the Mario IP has been firmly established, but I can't really fault it either because this is what it was adapting, and it came out in 1989. There's a weird rabbit hole of Mario cartoons. To my knowledge, there are 3. You've got the Super Show, and then you've got the Mario Bros. 3 cartoon, then Super Mario World. There's a lot of content here, and it's all fine. I think that people need to respect this cartoon more. It gave a lot of the Mario characters character, and it's still somewhat culturally relevant over 30 years later. Mama Luigi is iconic. Then going back even further, in 1986, there was a Japanese quote-unquote movie that was an hour in length. They had lore in video game manuals, and it's funny that they extrapolated this lore and made a movie out of it. It's a really cool alternate viewpoint on how the franchise could have turned out. It resembles nothing like what Mario is today, and it feels more like they made a generic adventure comedy film and slapped Mario on it for brand recognition. That's because they did. Miyamoto wasn't even involved in it at all, and there's all these random characters. It's a bad adaptation, and there are more obscure video game movies if you go back that far. far, but if you told me to look at those, they had no material. How do you talk about that? There was another Mario movie. Another two. The first of these two being the 1993 Mario movie. Everything I mentioned so far about the movies being that old that they aren't really adaptations of anything, but rather self-contained, obscure bits of media, applies here. It spawned the cultural phenomenon of mocking video game movies for being bad, and it was a fair one at that time. But I have a lot of nostalgia for this movie. I grew up watching it with my jaw dropped, and the fact that it was so far removed from anything Mario is associated with today is engaging. I made a video on it in 2021, and I still think it's a jank movie, but I really enjoy the 90s aesthetic. I think that Bob Hoskins as Mario is great casting. He looks like Mario, if you know what I mean. And I love John Leguizamo too. In the movie, he fits the character of that charming and charismatic younger brother. He doesn't have a mustache, but I don't really think he needed to. Mario and Luigi feel like Brooklyn plumbers. It was authentic. Behind the scenes of the movie was funny too. Like Bob Hoskins didn't take it seriously and drank before filming, which is hilarious to imagine. This movie demands respect. Sure, the director is mostly directed music videos, but I feel that you can see the skill set come through, as the set designs in this movie are incredible. Dino Hatton is such a cool dystopian city, and making Bowser into a malevolent dictator was such a creative approach to bringing the turtle guy to life. I haven't told you all yet. Bowser is a man in this movie. It's a weird curveball for sure, but with the lore dump at the beginning, you know that a meteorite hit Earth and made two parallel timelines? I really like how they approached the Mario franchise from a creative angle. Now that begs the question, is it a good adaptation? Of course not. At this point in the franchise, there is considerably more to go off of. Super Mario World had come out by that point, and while I acknowledge that there was still too little to go off of to make a movie, especially for 1993, the fact that you have all of these set pieces given to you in the form of the different worlds in the Mario world, to acknowledge that and still go with a dystopian story is really funny. If you watched the 1993 Mario movie, you would not think that the game is a platformer. You'd think that it's a sci-fi shooter. Sure, there is the odd reference, the odd bit of Mario iconography, and the sequence where Mario and Luigi suit up is really cool, but I would have to be extremely biased to say that this is a good adaptation. Now, on the other hand, Illumination, it's a company alright, they make animated movies okay, they all vary in quality, but I am not that big of a fan. But I was cautiously optimistic when it was revealed in 2018 that Illumination were making their own Mario adaptation. At the time, we were all terrified, and justifiably so. The 1993 Mario movie existed, Mario the character was extremely tame, he never really had a character, he would just make noises occasionally, and hearing Charles Martinet talking for over an hour would be weird. We all cautiously waited, and I won't lie, I love bad media, so I was looking forward to it regardless, and I loved reading all the weird rumors for the plot. Shigeru Miyamoto being involved was a good sign, and the fact that Mario is over 30 years old now is a good sign. They understand the Mario IP and everything in it now. They don't need to make things up. 1993. So how did it turn out? Illumination did a great job here, I won't lie. The Super Mario Bros. Movie is a great adaptation of the video games. It has everything you could ever want from an adaptation of the Mario Bros. Spoiler warning, by the way. I loved how the movie tied together all of these elements from the games and made them into one big world. This movie is the definition of charming. It's not perfect, but it's incredibly endearing as a Mario fan. I grew up in all of these games, and it's rewarding as a fan to see it pay off. The soundtrack is amazing, the art style is great, I really like the voice cast. Illumination deserves more credit for authentically recreating this world in movie form. It's crazy because it's everything I thought it would be, and I still thoroughly enjoyed it. I think that even if you're not a Mario fan, you'd still enjoy it. Everyone that watched it in the theater enjoyed it too. And I'm sure they weren't all extremely nerdy. Like me. And there are Easter eggs everywhere. Too many to count. Whenever I talked about Sonic 2, I mentioned how I thought they could have had a different plot that would have had an authentic feminist character. The Super Mario Bros. Movie does that and more. Peach had the biggest glow up of any Mario character. In the games, she doesn't do very much, and the one game where she stars, it's about her being emotional. Isn't that stereotypical? Here, they made Peach into a girl boss, and a good role model more than anything. They shifted the dynamic of the characters to where Mario is trying to save Luigi, which is a far more logical and reasonable of a goal. There is no reason why Mario should be trying to save Peach, a woman who he doesn't even know. Mario trying to save his brother? Yeah, why wouldn't he? Chris Pratt being Mario was surprisingly fine. Charlie Day as Luigi? Fine. They're good, no complaints from me. This movie is fun. Nothing more, and it doesn't need to be. It's not a good movie by any means. The character motivations are weak, and none of the characters have any real depth. Bowser as an antagonist flips back and forth between being foreboding and competent, and being a corny idiot. I kind of wish they just chose one and ran with it. They hint at Mario having this character arc about trying to get approval from his dad. It's used at the start and once at the end. Not at all in between. Apart from a joke with DK. A lot of the movie is completely arbitrary, which I think is fine, as the Mario games make very little sense. Like Mario and Luigi have this sequence in the beginning where they're maneuvering through Brooklyn, and it didn't need to happen at all, but I'm happy it did. There is no reason for the Kong Kingdom to have go-karts, but they do. To me, it felt shoehorned so they could save time. When I was watching the movie, it reminded me of Ratchet and Clank, for no other reason than like, wow, Super Mario Bros. Could have been that bad. Thankfully, it wasn't. For everyone who is complaining about the story being shallow, out of every IP I've talked about, the one with the least amount of story by far is Mario. At least with Sonic. Sonic is known for story. Mario has never been known for story, and never will be. Who here has played Mario for the plot? Yeah, exactly. That's what made Super Mario Bros. Interesting to just about everyone. Will it be good? How will they adapt it? They've adapted it alright. Now that the movie is out, I think that we have to talk about Shigeru Miyamoto for a bit. He has created so many iconic game franchises and has now moved into film at the age of 70. He co-produced this movie, and I can guarantee you that if he wasn't there, this video would be drastically different. It reminded me a bit of Sonic 1 in that it was kind of generic, but it had to be, as again, it was uncharted territory. But with all of the seeds that were planted in this movie for a possible sequel, I'm excited for the future of Shigeru Miyamoto and Illumination. I completely forgot that Illumination made this movie halfway through. That's how good it is. Maybe my opinion will change, but I put it up with The Last of Us. They're both great, but for incredibly different reasons.